After e4, e5, f4, d5, a move we haven't seen at all is knight to c3 right now. This is met with pawn takes in f4. And now we have an immediate threat of playing queen h4, which is a strong move. So first of all, let's start with knight to f3, stopping that from happening. Okay, this is already met with d4, and now there's an attack on the knight. The knight will have to move, so we'll have to go backwards, basically. What if the knight tries to stay in the game? They say knight d5, but either way, you play g5, and these two pawns will hold together, and you're going to have a pawn advantage until the rest of the game. This cannot be met in any way. Let's say g3 is a typical move to dismantle the control, this small pawn chain, because as soon as white takes the pawn in f4 with the pawn, and then he plays d3, then this pawn will be easy target, because it will be taken back since it will not be protected anymore. Okay, after g3, c6 traps the knight. So the knight can't move anywhere. So that gives white a sense of urgency in defending the knight. So c3, let's say for example the knight will be able to go to b4 once it's being attacked. So c3 instead of g3, you still play c6, and the knight goes to b4, but every piece is badly placed. g4 comes, and now the knight can't move away by taking this pawn, because there's only one pawn defending these two, and there's two attackers over the two knights, so you can take one of them, and when one is done taking, the other one becomes free. So in this position, after knight to e5, okay, well, check. There's too many attackers over g3, so taking is really bad, and the pawn in g4 is well defended, so white doesn't have any counter attack, so has to play king e2, queen e7, attacking the knight. The knight has to move. It cannot be defended. I mean, it can be defended by taking this pawn, but then the white player is dropping the knight in b4. So let's see if white tries to survive. Knight to c4, you attack it again, b5. The knight can't move anywhere except the square a3. And now check. King moves to the only square, you take this knight. Pawn takes back. And now d3. Locking in all of these pieces. Well, except the queen. You can argue that the queen can move. Let's make an example. If queen to e1, then this is checkmate to follow, because check, and not necessarily checkmate, but you see you're winning the queen. Check, the king now has to move, and then you win the queen. You also have queen d4 check, which is even more accurate. You're going to checkmate. If take, then again take, and that's where you're going. So in this position, what if instead of queen e1, queen goes to b3, putting double attack over this pawn, and escaping the back rank for the moment. Okay, well, g3 check. Now the king can't go anywhere except g1, and then queen d4 is checkmate. So that means the white player has to take here. That means after this g3 check, the opponent has to take, and now it's not good to take because the king can take back. You're still winning, but best move is queen d4 check. And now king going to e1 doesn't work, because you play queen e5 check, and when the king goes back to f2, you can take this with check and then go to checkmate. If the king goes away here, you have bishop, and there's a pawn, very strong pawn defending these two squares. So instead of that, after this check, what happens if the king goes to f3? Okay, quietly develop the knight, and you've got an idea of playing bishop g4, and that's going to be the end of the game. If white plays rook to h4, stopping our bishop from going to g4, you still play bishop to g4. Boom! Rook takes, queen check, king f2, and now knight g4 becomes possible, since the rook is no longer protecting the fourth rank. Check. King has to go to g1, queen d4 check, king moves, pawn takes, is the quiet killer. Too many threats are going on. Queen takes d3 here, looking for swaps, doesn't work. You go knight f2, making a fork. Either way, you're threatening this check. King moves, and then you got a double check. He goes there, and then mate. This brings us back to the beginning, and we can play that the other move. So the early knight c3, you take in f4. And now what if white doesn't play knight f3, but rather takes this pawn? So he takes the pawn back, and there's also an attack on this pawn. Okay, this is still met with queen h4 check. And now again, the king has to move. You all know the familiar pattern of g3. It doesn't work. You got attack here, and when you're threatening so much, knight f3 attacks the queen, but then you push, check, you win the rook, promotes another queen, so that's gonna be it. So after this check, king e2, bishop g4 check, knight f3. There's many variations in which something like this perfectly holds together. It's all theory, but not in this one, and not in so many. Because if we're playing queen h4 check, that's because it's the best move. The thing is, the advantage might not be as massive as sometimes looks like, but it's never really good for the opponent king to be like that. Unless we're talking about some specific variations in the Vienna Gambit when there's a knight in c3, but this is the king's gambit. It's a little bit more risky. Although you can argue that the white player started off with knight c3, so it's a bit of a safer variation, and as a matter of fact it is. White is not going to total annihilation here, but it's losing. Bishop d6 comes now, and it's defending this pawn from the attack of the knight. d4, allowing the queen to go out and the bishop to put more attack over that pawn. This is met with knight c6, surprisingly. Let's look at two moves. If white develops, takes this, for example, okay, well then take back, and now castle. This is too strong, and the attack on d4 is just too strong. You also have a possibility to play knight e5 in case our opponent pushes this pawn, but that's not going to be the case. You also have an attack here, and then the queen can take the knight. This knight is a loose piece. c3 seems like it stops everything. Knight f6. You're attacking e4 and you're threatening to just take. So let's say, for example, queen c2 develops and defends here. It doesn't matter. You're going to take no matter what. Queen takes. Then you can pin the queen with the rooks. If instead, let's say e5, then you just take. The pawn in d4 is pinned. The pawn can't take because then rook takes queen. So if instead queen to e1, looking for a swap, with our queen we take this knight. If pawn takes, you won a piece. Queen takes f4. If king takes, defending the piece, then queen check. King moves to the only square where he can still defend the knight, otherwise the knight is still free. Rook h to e8, finalizing the attack. And now you're going to take this pawn with the rook, you're going to take the queen, and it's going to be game so over. e5, stopping that. Okay, doesn't matter, take. We can afford to sacrifice a knight. Then we have this all sorts of discover attacks, double checks and so on. Take back, you're still, going to do this. So let's take it from the start and show the last variation before we close this video. So the early knight c3 game. Fine, taking f4, and when they take us, check. King e2, check. Knight f3, bishop d6, d4 to defend that further, knight c6. Let's look at the c6 move immediately. Okay, still long castle. I mean, either way, we haven't looked at knight takes f4, but let's go once again through bishop f4. This is like basically a transposition into what happened before, and we take as we mentioned, and then we play knight f6. This move we didn't see before, which is g3. We respond to this with queen h6, and now the threat over e4 is renewed. If e5 this doesn't work, remember, knight takes, the pawn in d4 is pinned, the rook will be taking a queen. How are you going to defend? You can't defend that pawn, we mentioned that already. Knight takes e4 is happening no matter what, because the rook will be pinning the queen. So bishop to g2, maybe speeding up development. Knight takes e4, and now queen to c2, double attack on the knight and trying to develop somehow. But rook h to e8 is going to come no matter what. And now king to f1, best move, doesn't work anyway because g5, attacking the knight. The knight has to move. Let's say if white attacks the bishop as a counter attack, you have knight g3, and you can take it from here. You're going to be taking the rook, and you've got nothing to worry. Completely winning. If instead of h3, knight goes back to d3, saving itself for the moment, queen to f6, double attack over the knight in f3. Queen to d1, defending it. There's no other way to defend. If you defend it with a knight, you can take, and then the queen will be pinning the minor piece, and you can play g4 and win material. If white defends it with the queen, that's no longer possible, but you can play knight to d4. Boom! The knight is pinned, so has to take with the pawn. Rook takes. The knight is now pinned. Both knights are pinned. King to g1. Unpinning this knight from the attack of the queen just to start. Maybe playing h3 soon enough. Doesn't matter. Queen b6 threatening. Terrible discovered checks. You cannot play like queen to b3 looking for swaps because rook b4 check wins the queen. You cannot play knight takes here, hoping for some sort of counterplay. The best move here is not even to take this one. It's first check, king moves, check, king e1. The knight is still defending these squares, but now you can just take the queen. And last, to finish this variation, here we mentioned how development of the bishop doesn't help. What if knight takes in f4 and white at least preserves the bishop pair? Okay, take this knight. And now pawn takes is not possible because bishop takes knight for free. g3 doesn't work either because the pawn in h is pinned, so you can also take in g3. So what if king takes, you know, now there's two defenders over this knight. Now you just very quietly play knight f6. Now, e5 is not a fork, attacking these two minor pieces, because queen g4 should end the game soon enough. Remember, you can just take in e5, the pawn in d is pinned. We mentioned that already. So in this position, instead of e5, what if g3, attacking the queen? Again, queen to g4. And after you don't take in the pawn in e4, it's game over. So in this position, what if h3, stopping our queen from going to either g4 or h5 for a check that is really damaging. Surprisingly, you take the knight. That helps your opponent develop, but now you play g5, so the bishop will have to move again. It cannot be met with a counterattack like g3 because there's a bishop hanging, you're going to play check. And when the king moves, you swap queens and you win a bishop. If instead our opponent plays g4, counterattacking again, queen to g6, the bishop remains under attack, but you also have an attack on e4, double attack there, and that's going to be game over, as you can tell. So in this position, after g5, what if bishop saves itself from the attack of the pawn and goes to g3, attacking the queen? g4 wins, because now if pawn takes, well, okay, what can the king do? If he moves, you can play knight e4 check, go double attack of this bishop, you're completely winning. If he goes anywhere here, like you are attacking the piece, so you're going to win the bishop. So after this check, pawn will have to take. And now you don't even care about the rook, you play queen check. Again, king moving to f2, double attack of the bishop, is a stronger attack. And you're going to take the bishop as a completely winning position. Last but not least, just a quick mention. We're not going to go deeply through the line, but just a quick mention. In the early Nc3 move, you take in f4. We haven't gone through pawn takes, pawn recapturing this pawn, because this is basically not much difference. The patterns are the same. So queen check, obviously king moves, and now bishop to d6. Looks already slightly different because we're not making that check. But still, let's say knight f3, you pin the knight. So you're going to play bishop g4. The difference here basically is that there's a pawn in d5 attacking c6. So we can't play the usual knight c6 move going for the extra attack over the square f3. But at the same time there's a knight in c3. So there is no pawn in c3, meaning that the square d4 is an easier target. Besides, the knight is not in d5. There is not much attack over f5. Even if white were to play d4, the bishop just can't develop, and bishop to d2 will lock the queen in. So we're going to go through the obvious move now and thematic move, queen e1. Okay, this is met with queen h6. Don't want to swap queens. And now what happens after? Knight to e4, threatening to take a bishop pair away and then play d4 and play normal moves. Okay, ignore it, develop, knight e7, knight takes bishop, queen takes back, don't ruin your pawn structure for no reason. d4, the bishop is attacking this pawn, but we are still defending it. And we don't really take this pawn because you can play castle. It's the best move. Looks like we're giving a strong center to white, especially after c4. But this loses a pawn. White can't take back because rook check here pins, skewers the king and queen. The knight can't really block because it's pinned. So that pawn was going to be lost no matter what. Let's look at something else instead of a pawn to c4. What if white develops? Play queen h4, attacking this bishop, getting the queen out. Okay, bishop takes. Don't play. Oops, I should have played. Yeah, I said before, instead of c4, queen h4, but I left the pawn in c4. Okay, pawn back. Now here, don't take back with the king, because then that runs into such a strong check. So pawn takes back. Knight to g6. Further the defense of the pawn in f4, attacks the queen has to move, and we're still defending that pawn. The rook is coming into the game soon.